The first thing Sergeant Elara Voss noticed when the Kethera ship descended over Sao Paulo was that it did not make a sound. That was the wrong part to notice. She knew it even then. The city was screaming, car alarms, human voices, the crack boom of something large collapsing 3 blocks north. And her brain had chosen to fixate on the silence of that ship, the way the mind sometimes grabs a small, clean detail in place of the catastrophe surrounding it. The Kethera cruiser was the size of a city district, matte black, shaped like a flattened cephalopod, its underbelly studded with apertures that glowed the deep amber of old bruises. It made no sound because it did not use conventional propulsion. It moved through space and now through atmosphere by folding the medium around itself. Physics bent to its preference, noise an afterthought it had dispensed with millennia ago. Elara stood in the street below, rifle at low ready, and watched it hover. Around her, the hastily assembled fire team, Corporal Danny Reeves, Private Tomas Queiroz, and Specialist Yuki Abe had gone very still. This was not trained stillness. This was the stillness of prey animals clocking something they could not categorize. Elara had felt it herself 2 seconds ago, before she pushed it down. She had been a soldier for 11 years, and she had been afraid many times and had learned, not without cost, the difference between fear that tells you something and fear that wastes you. This fear told her something. She filed it and moved on. "Form up," she said. Her voice came out even. She was proud of that. "What are the orders?" Reeves asked. She was a lean woman from the north, fast hands, too smart for her rank, and she was asking the question with the controlled urgency of someone who already knew there weren't any orders. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Reeves had the ability to assess situations accurately, quickly, and without sentimentality, a quality that made her essential in the field and occasionally difficult in briefings. Right now, it was essential. Hold position, assess. Queiroz laughed. It was not a funny laugh. Assess, right. He was 19, a communications tech who had been reclassified as infantry 3 months ago, when infantry stopped being a category with meaningful enrollment requirements. He had a rifle he'd fired in training twice and in the field 4 more times, none of them at a target that looked like this. He looked at the ship the way a boy looks at something he cannot believe is real, which was honest, because the ship was not a thing the human nervous system had been built to encounter without preparation. "It's moving," Abe said. It was. The cruiser drifted northwest, patient, impossibly large, and from its underbelly a structure descended on a column of amber light, a hexagonal platform, roughly 40 meters across, which settled onto the broad plaza of Avenida Paulista like a communion wafer placed on an open hand. Around it, 3 smaller ships peeled away and took up positions above the surrounding streets. The smaller ships were each the size of a commercial aircraft. They were the smallest things the Kethera had sent. From her position on the ground, Elara could see people running, not in panic, or not only in panic, but with the purposeful scatter of a population that had received emergency alerts and was trying to implement them. Sao Paulo had contingency plans for many things. It did not have contingency plans for this. The contingency plans it had were being applied anyway, because applying the plans you have to the situation in front of you is what people do when there is no alternative, and it was not working, and people were applying them anyway. "I'm reading," Reeves started, looking at her tactical pad. Then she stopped. "Reading what?" "Temporal emissions." She looked up. "Elara, temporal emissions. Whatever's on that platform, it's not just a weapon, it's a..." The light from the platform turned white and then turned everything. Elara hit the ground because her legs stopped working, not because she made a decision. Her vision went white, then fragmented, then resolved into a noise pattern like static on an old television. She could feel the ground under her, the asphalt, solid and gritty, and she focused on that, on the specific texture of it, because it was the only thing that was still what it was supposed to be. Around her, the city sounded wrong, not louder, not quieter, but layered, as if sounds from different moments were arriving simultaneously, the same street at different ages playing in chorus. She heard traffic that was not there. She heard rain that was not falling. She heard, briefly and impossibly, a language she could not identify, not Portuguese, not Spanish, not anything she knew, speaking in the cadence of people who were comfortable where they stood. And then that sound folded under and was gone. Then it stopped. She opened her eyes. The platform was gone. The plaza was gone. The buildings were wrong, same skyline, roughly, but different. Older, windows misaligned, street markings she did not recognize. The Kethera ship still hung in the air above her, unchanged, a fixed point in a city that had been shuffled. She stood up carefully and looked around. The street was the same street in the same place, but the street sign on the corner said something in Portuguese that was not the name of this street, and the vehicles parked along the curb were wrong by 30 years. Good condition, not antiques, but wrong model years, wrong designs, wrong. The city was, she understood in the same moment she understood her own name, out of order. Contact, she said, force of habit. Then she heard the voice. It came from everywhere, not broadcast through speakers, but somehow ambient, present in the air itself, the way weather is present, the way temperature is present. The Cathara spoke in translated standard because they had decided, long ago, that they would give humans the courtesy of comprehension before the end. The translation was slightly wrong in ways that made the voice feel more alien, not less, the cadence off, stress on the wrong syllables, effect missing in places where it should be, so that every sentence landed as both informational and vaguely threatening. The way a medical diagnosis can be technically neutral and deeply frightening at the same time. You are the species designated H7 on the taxonomic scale of the Cathara continuous. Your civilization occupies a single star system, has achieved limited interstellar awareness, and has demonstrated, over 2,000 years of documented contact observation, a pattern of resource, exploitation, territorial conflict, and recursive self-destruction that has been assessed as incompatible with integration into the continuous. We have attempted the standard corrections. They have failed. This action is therefore a terminal correction. Alara stood up. Her knees hurt. She looked around for her team. Reeves was there, on one knee, functional, already scanning. Queiroz was face down, starting to move. Abe was gone, just gone, a space where she had been, the ground undisturbed, as if she had never been there at all. Terminal correction, Reeves said flatly. They're going to kill us. Not exactly, Alara said. She had been listening to the shape of what the voice had said, the specific words. Not kill. Correct. Terminal correction, they're going to unmake us. There's a difference. What is the difference? Alara did not have the technical language for it yet. She would find it later, when Dr. Fiona Marchetti explained it to her in a tent, surrounded by people who were trying to rebuild a command structure from the rubble of a city that existed in 4 different decades simultaneously. At that moment, standing in the wrong street, all she had was the thing she had built over 11 years of being alive in dangerous places, the sure knowledge that precise language from an enemy is always worth parsing. Terminal correction, not termination, correction, implying something that persists after the correction, implying not the end of the thing but the restructuring of it. I don't know, she said, but we're still here, so it hasn't worked yet. She was right, though it took Dr. Fiona Marchetti, one of the 3 surviving CERN theoretical physicists who had been in Sao Paulo for a conference on nonlinear temporal mechanics, to explain it fully. Marchetti was a small woman in her 50s with the physical presence of someone who had spent 3 decades being underestimated and had found uses for that. She had been in a laboratory 2 kilometers north when the platform activated. She had been knocked sideways through time by 17 minutes and ended up in an alley that had not existed yet when she left, disoriented and furious and immediately, professionally, fascinated. She found Alara and Reeves at the military cordon that had reformed around the remnants of the city center. She walked past 6 guards who tried to stop her because she had the expression of someone who had ceased to recognize obstacles as a category, and she sat down across from Alara in the command tent and put a data tablet on the table without preamble. The Cathara device, she said, is called, in the closest translation, an unraveler. The Cathara continuous does not practice genocide in the conventional sense. They consider it crude, inelegant, and by their ethical framework, wasteful. What they do instead is, they find the threads. Every civilization has what they call temporal threads, sequences of events that form the foundation of what you are. The moment you learned fire, the moment your first written symbol was carved, the moment your social structures organized around cooperation rather than dominance. Sever those threads, and the civilization doesn't die. It just fails to cohere. The people still exist biologically, but the continuous line of accumulated human experience, culture, knowledge, identity, everything you built in sequence, everything that makes a human more than a biological machine, that stops being a line. It becomes noise. Alara looked at the tablet. On it was a schematics she didn't understand, and 4 symbols that she did. Earth, air, fire, water. The old alchemical symbols, circles and triangles, clean and ancient. The unraveler works by fragmenting what it calls elemental cores, focal points in the timeline where human civilizational continuity is most dense. There are 4 primary ones. Think of them as the 4 load-bearing points of a structure. The Cathara have scattered them across time using the device. They're contained, isolated, in 4 different periods of human history. Marchetti paused to let that settle. If we recover them and restore them to the present, the unraveler fails. Human temporal continuity restores. If we don't, Marchetti set down the tablet. In approximately 96 hours, the fragmentation reaches critical dispersal, and the process becomes irreversible. The threads don't just break, they forget they were ever continuous. And the Cathara know this? Alara asked. The Cathara designed this specifically so that we would know it, Marchetti said. They're not cruel in the way humans understand cruelty, but they are methodical. They want us to understand that what they're doing to us has been done before, to other civilizations, and that it is complete, that there is nothing to fight. She looked at Alara. They are wrong, but we need to be faster than they have ever needed us to be. Silence in the tent. You said 4 periods, Alara said. Yes, prehistoric era, approximately 40,000 years BP, colonial South America, mid-16th century, and 2 future eras, one in what appears to be the late 21st century, approximately 2087, and one in the 30th century. The 30th century. I need you to understand what I am telling you when I say that. I understand it. I'm not sure you do, with respect. Marchetti looked at her. You would be sending a human being to a point in time 1100 years in the future, to a place and situation we cannot preview, to recover an artifact from a Cathara presence that will have had 1100 years to grow. I want you to understand the scope. I understand it, Alara said again, not dismissively but with finality, the tone she used when a decision was made, and she needed everyone around her to know that reopening it would cost time they didn't have. Can you send us? The Cathara device, when it fired, didn't just scatter the cores, it cracked the temporal membrane across those coordinates. The cracks are still open. They're not stable. Each one will collapse in 18 to 20 hours from now. If someone is inside a crack when it collapses, she made a flat gesture. They're gone. They're gone. So the answer to can you send us is yes, with roughly 18 to 20 hours of margin before the window closes. The answer to can you come back is yes, if you find the core and return before the fissure collapses. The answer to can I guarantee any of this is no. Good enough, Alara said. She stood and looked at Reeves across the tent. 4 cores, 4 periods, 4 people. There was nothing more to add to that. Karos came when she asked, which she had not been uncertain about, but had been relieved by anyway. He stood up from rifle cleaning, his 3rd pass through it, the mechanism perfect and clean after the 2nd, the 3rd pass pure occupational therapy, and nodded once with the economical certainty of someone who had decided something important a long time ago and was simply being asked to act on it. He asked no questions about the mission scope, asked only 2 practical questions about equipment, and went to prepare. Specialist Yuki Abe materialized from the crowd around the command post like she had been there the whole time, which she may well have been. She had a cut across one eyebrow and a requisitioned civilian jacket over her uniform and was eating an apple, which she offered to Alara without comment. She had been in the adjacent block when the scatter happened, she said, and the block had jumped 4 years backward and then lurched 2 forward, and she had spent the intervening time helping a woman deliver a baby in the wrong year, and the baby was fine and the woman was fine, and she had found her way back because that was what she did. Reeves came back from the Cathara cordon with a bloody lip and a data crystal she had extracted from a Cathara scout drone before it reactivated, and chased her 3 blocks. The crystal contained partial operating schematics for the Unraveler's temporal fissure network. It took Marchetti 40 minutes to parse enough of it to plot entry vectors and identify the probable location of each core within its era. The 4th team member was a surprise. Colonel Benedita Faria, retired, 63 years old, who had been visiting her daughter in Sao Paulo when the ship arrived. She was short and broad and had the eyes of someone who spent a great deal of time thinking about things at long range. She had heard, through the tenuous command structure that still existed, that a team was being assembled for something unprecedented, and she had driven herself to the command post in a stolen city bus. She had asked the owner first, she told Alara, and the owner had said yes immediately, and presented herself with the air of someone who did not expect to be turned down. Why you? Alara asked. Because I'm a historian, Faria said, with an archaeological specialty in pre-Columbian and colonial South American culture. I speak 16 forms of 16th century Iberian Portuguese with period-accurate accent variances. She paused. And I'm 63. If I get stuck in a collapsing temporal fissure, the actuarial tables are less offended than if you send someone younger. Also, I've been wanting to see the 16th century for 40 years, and this is the only way I'm getting there, so. Alara assigned her colonial South America. She assigned herself the prehistoric period because she had looked at the options and decided that if anyone was going to be dumped into the Pleistocene with a rifle and 40,000 years of human prehistory pressing in from all directions, it should be the person with the most years of not dying in uncomfortable places. Reeves took the late 21st century crack, technical operator for a technical problem. Plus, Reeves was the one person on the team Alara was certain could adapt to future technology fast enough to be useful. Karaz got the 30th century. He had blinked at this assignment. "Why me?" he asked. Alara considered how to say this. "Because you still think things can be completely different from what they are," she said. "The 30th century is going to require someone who can handle the possibility of everything being different. Everything. Not just better or worse, but different in ways that don't map onto what we know." She paused. "And because if any of us is going to meet a version of humanity that's been fighting the Cathara for 1,000 years, I want it to be someone who's going to find that inspiring instead of overwhelming." Queiroz thought about this. "How do you know I'm going to find it inspiring?" "Because you clean your rifle for the 3rd time when it's already clean," she said. "And you do it because your hands want to be useful, not because you're afraid. People who clean their rifle a 3rd time out of fear would have stopped by now." He looked at her. Then he went to get his gear. Marchetti calibrated the vectors. The fissures were not doorways. They were wounds in the air, roughly oval, approximately 2 meters tall, edged with the visual static of a reality that had been cut and hadn't healed. They opened in sequence in the courtyard behind the lab, and each one smelled of ozone and something else. Something older than ozone. Something that had no name in any living language. The smell was different for each fissure. The prehistoric one, dry and mineral and vast. The colonial one, damp with river mud and wood smoke. The 2087 fissure, clinical, faintly metallic. The 30th century one was the strangest. It smelled of nothing at all. A vacuum of scent that was somehow more unsettling than any smell. Before she stepped through, Alara reached into her breast pocket and took out the one photograph she carried. Standard military issue. Allowed one personal item under uniform regulations. It was a picture of her at age 4, sitting in a red plastic chair in a kitchen, eating something orange, expression of intense concentration on her face. Her mother had taken it on a Tuesday morning that had no other significance. She looked at it for 2 seconds. Then she put it away. She stepped through the fire fissure. The first thing was heat. Not the heat of fire or sun, but the specific dry heat of a world that has not yet fully decided what kind of climate it wants to be. A heat with dust in it, with pollen from plants that have no names yet, with a particular rawness of air that has never passed through a filter. The light was wrong, the same sun, technically, but younger somehow, less filtered, arriving at a slightly different angle, that she couldn't explain physically but could feel the way you feel a room that's slightly too warm, slightly off, and cannot identify the specific element that's wrong. The air tasted of grass and something mineral and something sweet and something animal, and it was the richest air she had ever breathed. She was standing on a hillside, below her a valley, in the valley a river, clear and wide and cold-looking, catching the afternoon light and breaking it into white fragments. Along the river, smoke, not much, 3 thin columns rising straight in the still air, from fires that were not accidents but deliberate. Around those fires, movement, people. She crouched instinctively. They were far below, and upwind, and she was still. Her training told her these things, and she obeyed her training, and she watched. They were fully human. This was not the shock it might have been. She had known, intellectually, that Homo sapiens 40,000 years ago were anatomically modern, were us in all the biological ways that mattered, but knowing and seeing were different things. They moved like people. They gestured like people. She could hear, faintly, something that was almost language, rhythmic and social and occasionally punctuated by what might have been laughter. A child ran between 2 adults and was caught and swung, shrieking with the universal sound of a delighted child, and put down again. She stayed still for a while and just watched them. She didn't mean to. She had a mission and a window of 18 hours and a core defined. But she stayed still and watched them for a few minutes, because she had never in her life seen anything like this. Her species at its beginning, at the moment before any of it, in the daylight of the world's morning. The temporal core would not be near the fires. Marchetti had explained that the cores would be drawn to areas of concentrated human activity, but would not coalesce inside them. They would hover at the edge, where human presence touched but did not dominate the world, at the seam between human and everything else. She needed to look at the perimeter. She moved along the hillside, staying low, working eastward toward a cluster of large rocks at the valley's end where the river curved. The grass was ankle-high, good cover, and she moved through it with the specific patience she had learned in 11 years of moving through things quietly. Below her, the valley continued for several kilometers, and she could see now that there were more fires than she had first counted. 7, 8, spread along the river in loose clusters that suggested related groups rather than one community, the specific social structure of people who traveled together but maintained distinct hearths. Something moved to her left. She froze, turned her head slowly. It was not human. It was not Kethara. It was a cat, or rather, it was the thing that cats would eventually be, filtered through 40,000 years of proximity to humans and selective adaptation. Larger than any modern feline, long-bodied, muscular, coat the color of dry grass. It was 40 meters away, and it was not looking at her. It was looking at something farther down the slope. She looked where the cat was looking. The core. It was small. She would have missed it if she hadn't known what to look for. A sphere roughly the size of a clenched fist, hovering about a meter off the ground near the cluster of rocks at the valley's edge. It emitted no light visible to the naked eye, but through the portable scanner Marchetti had given her it blazed. A concentration of temporal energy, so dense it was almost a physical pressure, the scanner's display washing out around it, having to auto-calibrate twice before it could read the numbers accurately. Around it, the grass was wrong. Each blade at a slightly different stage of growth. The ground beneath it cycling through seasons in real time, frost and bloom and frost again, the past and future of that small patch of earth compressed into a standing wave. She checked the scanner for Kethara signals, nothing local. The Kethara had scattered the cores, but they were not maintaining a continuous guard presence in every era. They had bet on the temporal fissures, collapsing before humans could navigate them. That was their first mistake. They had underestimated how fast humans could organize around an existential problem. Or perhaps they hadn't underestimated, precisely. Perhaps they had simply assumed that humans, given 96 hours and an impossible task and a city that existed in 4 different decades, simultaneously would spend 40 of those hours arguing about who was in charge, and 30 more grieving, and the remainder in the kind of paralysis that comes from being told you've already lost. They had not accounted for Alara Voss cleaning her ribs and standing up. She was 20 meters from the core when the retrieval drone found her. The Kethara sent drones because they did not value their own proximity to danger, which was one of the things that separated them from humans in ways the Kethara considered evidence of their superiority, and Alara considered evidence of a gap that would one day be a problem for them. The drone was the size of a large dog, insectoid in structure, its 6 legs ending in manipulators rather than feet. It moved with the liquid speed of something that had no skeleton to constrain it, only intention-driving structure. It had been monitoring the fissure exit points, placed on automated watch, because the Kethara had not expected anyone to exit the fissures before they collapsed, and so had not assigned anything with a higher tier of intelligence to the watch. The drone had been careless with her. It came from her right fast. She fired. The rifle round hit the drone's chassis and sparked off it. Military-grade rounds were not designed for Kethara composite armor, which was several material generations beyond anything she carried. She fired twice more, targeting the joint between the drone's primary locomotion nodes, which Marchetti had identified in the schematics as structurally weaker than the main body, a design trade-off that prioritized speed over durability at the junctions. The second shot found the joint. The drone stumbled, 2 of its 6 legs misfiring, locomotion degraded from fluid to jerky, and she used the 3 seconds that bought her to sprint for the core. She was 10 meters away when a hand grabbed her sleeve. She spun, rifle up, and nearly shot a man in the face. He was tall, dark-skinned, wearing what she recognized from field research as a combination of sewn hides and plant fiber cordage that was more sophisticated than it looked, stitching deliberate and reinforced at the joints. He had painted lines on his forearms. Not decoration, she realized immediately, her pattern recognition arriving 2 seconds before her conscious analysis. The lines were specific, deliberate, the same symbols repeated in a pattern that indicated systematic knowledge, a record of something carried on the body. He was looking at the drone with an expression she recognized, not because she had seen it on a face from this era, but because the expression was old, was part of what humans had always been, assessment. He was looking at the drone and counting its capabilities. He had been counting them since before she noticed him. He said something to her. She didn't understand the language. No living person understood the language. But the tone was clear. He was telling her something specific about the drone, about how it moved, about where it was vulnerable. His hand went to the tool hanging at his hip, a hand axe, roughly worked from dark stone but edged with the specific precision of someone who made tools for use, not display, and he made a throwing gesture toward the drone's damaged side. She understood. "On 3, she said, knowing he couldn't understand the words, knowing it didn't matter, because they'd had the same 3 seconds and the same target and the same reason to use them. She counted with her fingers. 1, 2, he threw on 3, she fired on 3. The thrown axe hit the drone's damaged locomotion joint with a force and angle that was not casual. He had judged the throw perfectly, accounting for the drone's stumbled movement, leading the target by exactly the right distance. The kind of throw that is the product of a lifetime of throwing things accurately at moving targets when missing meant going hungry. Her rifle round hit the sensor cluster at the front of the chassis simultaneously. The drone spun, emitted a frequency she felt in her back teeth, and went still. She grabbed the core. The second her hand closed around it, the wave of temporal pressure hit her like a sudden depth change. 40,000 years of human continuity pressing against her palm. Everything that had been built and thought and learned and lost and rebuilt and carried forward, compressed into a sphere the size of her fist and humming like a living thing. She had to close her eyes and breathe for a moment because it was almost too much to hold. Almost she held it. When she opened them, the man was watching her. He reached out and touched the core where it sat in her hand. Not grabbing, just touching, one finger, the way you touch something you are trying to understand. The temporal static around the core responded to his touch, cycling faster for a moment, the seasons of that patch of ground accelerating and then settling. She thought about what this moment was, about what it meant that a woman from 40,000 years in this man's future was standing in his valley with an alien drone's wreckage at their feet and a piece of the compressed essence of human civilization in her hand. She thought about all the people between them, all the generations, all the languages, all the wars and harvests and cities built and forgotten and built again. She thought about the photograph in her pocket and what it would mean to him, to show him the kitchen and the chair and the child and tell him, "This is where your fire goes." She took out the photograph. He looked at it, at the small girl in the red chair, at the kitchen, at the strange materials and flat light, and back at her. His expression changed in a way she couldn't fully name. Something that was recognition, maybe. Or something more layered than recognition, something more like the look of someone who has suspected something about the nature of things and is having the suspicion confirmed. She put the photograph away. She met his eyes. She said, in her own language that he could not understand, "We do okay." He said something in his language that she could not understand. He said it quietly, with the cadence of something certain, something that needed to be said aloud even though only the valley would hear it. She believed they had said the same thing. She ran for the fissure. Colonel Benedita Faria stepped out of the colonial fissure and immediately knew 3 things. She was in the right period, she was in the wrong location, and she was visible. The right period because of the sky, the particular quality of unfiltered 16th century air, the specific smell of it, no industrial particulate, just wood smoke and river mud, and something floral she couldn't identify but suspected was a species that no longer existed in the present. The air quality alone was disorienting in the way that great purity can be disorienting, the absence of things she had never consciously noticed but had always been breathing. The wrong location because she had expected the interior of Sao Paulo state, what would have been indigenous territory in the mid-16th century, and she was instead at the edge of a river settlement that bore all the marks of a Portuguese colonial outpost. Rough timber structures, a half-built stockade, a flagpole with a flag she recognized even at this distance, even through the eye strain of temporal transition. The visible part was self-explanatory. She was standing in the open on a dirt path in the afternoon sun, and a man with a crossbow was looking at her. She raised her hands. "Por favor," she said. Her 16th century Portuguese was not perfect, but it was considerably better than anyone in the 21st century had a right to. Assembled over 4 decades of archival research and 2 years of structured reconstruction work she had done as an academic exercise that was now unexpectedly a survival skill. I am a traveler. I am lost. I am not a threat. I am looking for a light near the water. A sphere hovering above the ground. Have you seen it? The man with the crossbow stared at her. He was in his 40s, weathered in the specific way of men who have spent decades outdoors in climates that did not suit them, with the expression of someone who had survived this long by not trusting anything quickly. He looked at her clothes. 21st century tactical gear, completely incomprehensible to him, material he had no category for, fasteners he could not identify, and his eyes narrowed. She watched the crossbow angle stay level. What are you? He said. A fair question, and one for which she did not have a good answer in the 16th century. A woman, she said, far from home. I need to find the sphere. His name was Sebastião, she learned eventually, and he had been in Brazil for 11 years, part of a Bandeirante expedition that had fractured 3 months prior over disagreements about gold and who owned it, which was, in Faria's professional assessment, the most 16th century way to describe a catastrophic organizational failure. He was what remained of one faction, himself, 2 other men, and a translator, an indigenous man named Juraci who spoke Portuguese with an accent and precision that told her he was considerably more multilingual than he was letting on. Juraci watched her from a distance when Sebastião brought her to the camp, watched her with the particular attention of someone who was accustomed to watching new arrivals and reading them quickly. She did not tell Sebastião what she was looking for. She told him she was a traveler with knowledge of medicine, which was partially true. She had an advanced wilderness first aid certification, a field medical kit, and 4 decades of reading primary sources from the era that included detailed medical accounts, and that she was willing to trade her knowledge for guidance. This was the currency that moved in this period, knowledge and labor and practical capability, and he accepted it with the pragmatic suspicion of someone who was suspicious of everything, but too pragmatic to refuse a useful offer. The core was at the river bend, 3 kilometers north. She could see it from a distance through the scanner, the same hovering sphere, the same temporal static, but here the effect manifested differently. The riverbank around it was cycling through centuries of ecological change, vegetation growing and dying and growing again in accelerating loops. The water at that bend sometimes running clear and sometimes running brown, silt from a flood that hadn't happened yet. The river itself seemed uncertain at that point, as if it wasn't sure yet which direction it wanted to run. The Cathara drone here was different, not the mobile insectoid unit from the prehistoric period, but a stationary Guardian module, a flat disk the size of a dining table hovering 2 meters off the ground above the core, rotating slowly, its sensor array sweeping in overlapping arcs. It was quieter than the insectoid drone, more patient, and it was covering a larger area with a systematic precision that told her it was running a programmed pattern rather than actively hunting. Faria crouched behind a stand of dense riverside vegetation and watched it rotate. She had 30 minutes by her estimate before Sebastião would start asking questions she didn't want to answer. She needed to be faster than that. Juraci crouched beside her. He had followed her from the camp without asking, and she had let him come because asking him to stay would have taken longer than bringing him, and because she had read enough primary sources to know that the people whose land this was had been navigating it and everything in it for longer than any map existed. What is that? Juraci asked. Something from very far away, she said. From across the water? She looked at him. He was watching the drone with the same focused assessment, the counting of capabilities, the quiet measurement, the same expression she would later hear described by Alara on a hillside 40,000 years in the past. From farther than that, she said. It wants the light, he said, not a question. It's guarding the light. I need to get past it. He was quiet for a moment, watching the drone's rotation. Then, it watches in circles. Same circles, it doesn't change. She looked at the drone again. He was right. The sweep was mechanical, algorithmic. The Cathara had not anticipated that a human observer, a careful human observer with reasons to be careful, might notice the pattern within minutes of arrival, because the Cathara had modeled the technological response of the target era, and had not modeled attention. They had not modeled the fact that surviving in this world required reading the rhythm of everything around you Because the rhythm of everything around you was the difference between being alive tomorrow and not. Yes, she said. Same circles. There is a gap, he said. After it turns this way, he indicated the direction. It is looking away for about the time it takes to walk from that tree to the water. She counted it. He was right. Approximately 7 seconds. I need 3 seconds more than that, she said. He reached into his bag and produced without ceremony a clay vessel the size of his fist, sealed with rendered fat. River tar, he said. It burns. We put it on the front of that thing. It burns. It goes blind for a moment. You have your 10 seconds. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about every time in 40 years of studying this period. She had read an account that described the people of this time and place as primitive. She thought about every time the word had passed without comment. She thought about how wrong it was, how specifically and completely wrong. You have done things like this before, she said. He smiled for the first time, small and precise. Different things. Same idea. When it was done, when the tar hit the drone sensor housing and ignited and bought her the 10 seconds, and she had the core in her hand, and the drone was spinning and screaming in frequencies that sent the birds from the trees for a kilometer in every direction, disrupting the whole afternoon. She sat on the riverbank and breathed. The core in her hand pressed against her palm with the same dense continuity. She had been told to expect the weight of centuries, and she held it carefully. Gerasi sat beside her, watching the drone, which had stopped spinning and was now hovering in place, making sounds of deep electronic distress. "Where are you from?" he asked. She looked at him. She had been thinking about what to say to this question, thinking about it since she arrived, since she realized she would be asked it. She had thought about lying, about vague answers that would neither mislead nor inform. She looked at the river, at the bend where the temporal static was already fading now that the core was removed. "Far away," she said again. It was the truest thing she could say. He nodded, accepting this. Then he said something in his own language, and then, for her benefit, translated it into Portuguese. "The river always comes back to the same ocean." He paused. "My grandmother said that." Faria thought about all the rivers she had studied, all the civilizations she had catalogued, all the centuries between this man and the world she had come from, all the things that were carried forward and the things that were lost and the things that persisted in different forms. "Mine too," she said, in different words. She pressed the clay bead he offered into her hand as she stood, and she closed her fingers around it, and she ran for the fissure. Danny Reeves came through the late 21st century fissure at a run because the fissure itself was already contracting. She had been the last one out of the transit sequence, and her window was narrower than planned. And she hit the floor of what turned out to be a transit hub of some kind at a low roll, came up on one knee, rifle at high ready, and found herself surrounded by 50 people who were all looking at her. She lowered the rifle. "Sorry," she said, in a hurry. The transit hub, she assessed it in the seconds after arriving, was functional but rough, makeshift. The kind of infrastructure you build when you are operating under pressure and have limited material and maximum urgency. The year was approximately 2087, which put it 34 years after what she was already starting to think of as the first Kethara contact period, and 2 years into what the Kethara had apparently designated as the terminal correction window. The people in the hub were survivors. She could see it in their gear, in the specific economy of their movements, in the way they watched exits and each other simultaneously. She had the same look herself and recognized it the way a species recognizes its own. A woman came forward from the group. She was young, mid-20s, and she moved with the particular certainty of someone who had been given too much responsibility too fast and had grown into it through friction rather than training. She had a Kethara data reader on her wrist, salvaged, heavily modified, the casing cracked and resealed with something silver and iridescent that Reeves identified after a moment as thermal tape from a civilian insulation kit. She was using alien technology she had taken apart and rebuilt to serve her purposes. She had the eyes of someone who understood how things worked, fundamentally at the level below their outer surface. "You came from the fissure," the woman said. Her name was Adara. "Yes, we've been watching it. It's been contracting for 6 hours. Where are you from?" 2026, Sao Paulo, the day of the scatter. "We're trying to stop it." Adara looked at her for a long, measured moment. Something moved in her expression, not hope, which was too simple for it, but something more complex, something that had more layers than hope, that included grief and exhaustion and determination in proportions that were approximately equal. We know about the scatter, she said. We've been working on stopping it, the downstream effects, the dispersal, for 2 years. We have 70 people in 12 cells across what used to be South America. She paused. We don't have the core. You need the Earth core, right? Marchetti's schematics showed 4. Air core, Reeves said. This is the 21st century crack. Right, air. Adara turned and walked, clearly expecting Reeves to follow. Come see what we have. What they had was extraordinary in the way that things built by desperate people over 2 years without adequate resources are extraordinary. Not polished, not complete, but thoughtful in every individual decision, every component chosen for a reason, and modified to be more useful than its original purpose. The jamming device, the aperture tool, a Cathara sensor array rebuilt as a long-range scanner, 3 data tablets running software that had been written from scratch because the commercial options had failed to survive the scatter's effects on computational infrastructure. Adara's people had not had much. They had used what they had until it became more than what it was. The core, Adara said, pulling up a display. The Cathara have it in an extraction station here. She pointed. They moved it inside 3 days ago. When the fissure started contracting, they knew someone might come through. It's not just guarded. It's contained in a shell we haven't been able to open. Why not? We don't have the resonance frequency. Reeves reached into her pack. She took out the data crystal. This is from the original Unraveler deployment. Partial operating specs for their containment architecture, including, I think, the resonance frequencies for their containment shells. Adara took it. She looked at it. She looked at the reader on her wrist. If this has what you think it has, then you've been 2 years away from cracking it. I just walked in with the last piece. Reeves met her eyes. Show me your aperture tool. The tool was good, better than good. It had 3 redundancies built in that the original Cathara design didn't have. Modifications that came from understanding the device's failure modes through observation and building around them. Adara's team had been watching Cathara containment architecture fail for 2 years under various conditions and had incorporated every lesson. You built failure modes into the redundancies, Reeves said. The original design fails at resonance values above 7.4, Adara said. We adjusted the damping coefficient. That's the hard part, Reeves said. Most people fix the primary function and miss the edge cases. Adara looked at her with the expression of someone who had spent 2 years being underestimated. Most people don't spend 2 years with nothing else to do. They went into the extraction station at midnight local time with 8 people, 2 modified Cathara devices, and a plan that Adara had laid out in 45 minutes of focused, rapid-fire coordination. The plan was clear, and the contingencies were specific, and when Reeves asked about the second-tier fallback, Adara already had one. The perimeter field went down first. The jamming device handled it, cycling through frequencies until it found the gap that Marchetti's schematics indicated should exist. The 6 Guardian drones converged on the field generator, programmed to protect their perimeter, which meant they were not watching the side entrance. The containment shell opened when Reeves applied the resonance frequency at precisely the right angle through Adara's modified aperture device. The core sat inside, the same sphere, the same temporal static, the same compressed weight pressing against everything around it. Reeves took it. She looked at Adara. Come back, Adara said. When it's done. Come back here. I'll try. Adara shook her head. No, I mean, this period, this year. Come back and see what we build. Her voice had something in it that was not quite a request. I want you to see that it works. That what we're doing right now, it works. That we get somewhere worth getting to. Reeves looked at her for a moment. She thought about what 60 more years of this, of Adara, and the 70 people in 12 cells, and the modified alien technology, and the 2 years of documentation that Adara had pressed into her hand with the words, so you don't have to start from zero, would produce. She thought about what a world looked like when it was built by people who modified things to serve them, rather than accepting the version they were. Given, I'll come back, she said. I promise. She ran for the fissure. Tomas Queiroz stepped through the 30th century fissure and nearly walked off the edge of a ship. He caught himself on a railing that was not there when he reached for it but appeared under his hand, responsive, as if the ship had noticed him, and he gripped it and looked down and immediately regretted looking down. Below the ship was space, not the sky that space looks like through atmosphere, not the abstract space of photographs, but space directly and completely. Stars and void and the distant blue-white disk of Earth farther away than it should be. And the ship beneath him was enormous, several hundred meters at least, and it was not alone. 3 more ships of similar scale held formation around it, close enough that he could see their hull markings, and between the formation and the stars, something else, a Cathara cruiser. The same design, the same matte black and amber, but larger. The design had been refined over 1,000 years while remaining recognizable, in the way that things refined for function rather than style remain themselves across iterations. "You came from the fissure," said a voice behind him. He turned, releasing the railing carefully, and found a woman who was, at first estimate, not much older than him. She was wearing something that was part flight suit and part light armor, practical and layered, and she was armed, and she was looking at him with the assessment gaze. The same gaze he had been seeing on every human face in every era he had read about in the past day and a half, the counting of capabilities, the quick measurement of threat and potential. "I came from the fissure," he confirmed. 2026, Sao Paulo. Something moved in her expression. She was quiet for a moment. "We know 2026, she said. "The scatter. The beginning of the long war." She looked at him with something complex. It was not pity exactly. More like the feeling of meeting an ancestor. "I'm Captain Sue. This is the colonial ship Esperanza. The Cathara. They're still here," he said. "They're still here. We haven't beaten them. We haven't lost." She said the last part with a specific emphasis that told him it mattered, that not losing after 1,000 years of conflict was not nothing. "We exist, we expand, we fight, they persist." It is, she considered her words, an ongoing conversation. "The core," he said, "we know about the core. The Cathara have it. They pulled it 6 months ago when the fissure opened. It's on that ship." She looked at the Cathara cruiser. "We can't reach it directly. We've tried. Every approach in range triggers a defense response before we can close." He looked at the ship. He thought about the distance, the coverage arcs of its defense craft, the sensor range. He thought about what the Cathara were designed to do and what they weren't. He thought about what he knew about how their systems worked, from Marchetti's schematics, from 6 hours of briefing, from 18 hours of living in a city that was being unraveled by their technology. "You've been trying to reach the ship," he said. "Yes, but the core is what you need, not the ship. They're the same physical target, but they're different problems." She looked at him. "The core is a massive temporal emitter," he said. "Dense, loud and temporal signal. The Cathara know you can track it, so they know if you move it or move toward it, you'll follow." But he stopped, worked through it. "What if you don't go toward it? What if you give them something that looks like the core? From their sensor perspective, somewhere else. Somewhere they have to respond to. Somewhere outside their defensive perimeter, where responding means moving the ship, moving the coverage." And while they're reorienting, Sue was very still. "You're talking about a lure. I'm talking about a lure. What do you have that generates temporal emissions?" The wreckage from the scatter's fissures had never fully resolved. Fragments of temporal, fissure material had been floating in the system for 1,000 years, too dangerous to dispose of, too valuable to ignore. Sue's crew had been collecting them, cataloging them, storing them in a shielded bay. They were loose temporal energy, uncontained, emitting at roughly 60% of a core's signature density. "Close enough," Karaz said when she told him the number. "If their detection system is calibrated to certainty rather than probability, if they scan for what they expect to find rather than all possible variance." "They scan for what they expect," Sue said. "They always know exactly what they're looking for. They've always known. We've been trying to be something they don't expect for 600 years, and it's hard because..." She stopped. "Because they're very old and they've seen a lot of things," he said. "Yes, but they haven't seen us being unexpected on purpose," he said. "Not systematically. They've seen us surprise them, but they've interpreted it as inconsistency, unpredictability, the randomness of an inferior species. They haven't. Have they ever thought that we were deliberately confusing them?" She looked at him for a long time. Something shifted, not in her face, which remained careful, but in the room, in the air between them. "No," she said slowly, "I don't think they have. That," he said, "is a gap." It took 4 hours to construct the lure and 2 more to position it, using a drone that Sue's crew ran from 20 kilometers off the Cathara ship's sensor arc. When the lure transmitted, the Cathara response was exactly what they had calculated. 3 defense craft broke formation and moved toward the emission source, and the main ship oriented attention pivoting, not its body fully, but its sensors, its priority, its defensive focus, toward the decoy. 12 minutes. Sue flew it herself, the Esperanza at maximum quiet running, using an approach vector that had been opened by the defense craft's departure. Kairaz was in the forward bay with 3 of her crew and a cutting tool adapted from mining equipment. The Cathara ship's hull this close was like being beside a cliff face, black and massive and absolutely certain of itself. They cut in. He would not describe, later, what it was like inside. He would say the scale was wrong in ways that were not entirely spatial. He would say, the Cathara had built this ship to contain things, and they were very good at containment. He would say, the core, when they reached it, was in a vault 3 meters deep in composite architecture. And he followed the temporal signal through it, and his hand went through the aperture. They cut and his fingers closed around the sphere. The weight of it. He was a communications tech who had been reclassified as infantry and handed a rifle he barely knew how to use. He had stood in a street watching a city he loved come apart in wrong years. He had cleaned a rifle 3 times because his hands needed to be useful. He had stepped through a hole in the present into the far future. He knelt on the deck of a ship 1,000 years from home and held a piece of what humanity had accumulated. Every fire, every word, every bridge over every river, every child who was taught the name of something and passed it on. He thought about his grandmother from the fishing village who had worked the same job for 31 years and never regretted a day. He thought about her face when she talked about the mornings when the light came off the water a certain way. Kairaz, Sue said behind him, steadying, not urgent. We need to go. He stood. He held the core carefully, the way you hold something that has no replacement, and he walked back the way they had come. At the fissure he turned to her. He wanted to say something that was equal to the moment, to what he had found here, the Esperanza and her 3 companion ships in formation, a humanity in the 30th century that had not won and had not surrendered, that had been fighting for 1,000 years and was still flying, still looking for the gap. You're incredible, he said. She considered this. Then she said, we're human. It's the same thing. He went through the fissure. The 4 of them converged on Marchetti's lab within 6 minutes of each other. Elara came first, core in hand, ribs aching from a hit she hadn't mentioned to anyone. Then Faria, with a clay bead she was rolling in her fingers, and a crossbow graze she hadn't mentioned either. Then Kairaz, wide-eyed, holding the air core in both hands. Then Reeves last, coming through as the late 21st century fissure contracted to a thread and vanished behind her. They put the 4 cores on Marchetti's calibration table, and Marchetti looked at them, and her professional calm fractured for about 5 seconds before she reconstructed it. All 4, she said, in 18 hours. She sat down. It was not planned. She sat down because that's what happened. All 4, Elara confirmed. They had 31 hours left to the point of irreversible dispersal. The Unraveler platform was still in position, still operational, counting down. Marchetti ran the numbers on Kairaz's theory: simultaneous insertion, 4 cores, a feedback state the system was never designed to handle, and came back with restoration. Net effect, restoration. The math worked. The catch was that it had never been tested on a Cathara system, that the math was theoretical, that the platform was guarded, and that they would need to clear 50 meters in approximately 4 seconds. They talked through it once. Then they stopped talking and prepared. The city at 3 in the morning was quieter than it should have been and stranger than it should have been. Parts of it were still temporally unstable. Blocks where 3 different decades coexisted. Traffic lights from different eras. A park that couldn't settle on its age. Buildings that were sometimes new and sometimes old and sometimes in between in the time it took to walk past them. The surviving population had organized around the stable zones with the practical adaptability that humans bring to catastrophe, making the unstable zones into corridors and landmarks rather than obstacles, labeling them on handmade maps that were passed between people in the specific informal information network that emerges when formal networks fail. Elara's team moved through the city and did not speak much. Kairaz had the air core in a case Marchetti had made for it, padded and sealed. Reeves had the jamming device slung across her back and Adarad's data chip in her breast pocket, pressed against her chest. Faria was moving without apparent pain from the crossbow wound, which meant the pain was present and she had decided not to acknowledge it, which was a choice Elara recognized. Elara had her ribs and the photograph in her pocket and 11 years of not dying. The plaza was lit amber from the Cathara ship above, the underbelly glow washing the ruins of Avenida Paulista in false light. The Unraveler platform was at the center, hexagonal, 10 meters to a side, its surface pulsing with the slow, rhythmic operation of a system that was very close to completing its work. 4 insertion points at the platform's cardinal positions waiting. The Kethra Field Unit, 8 operators, 3 drones. Perimeter configuration was arranged around it with a precision of something that expected to be here a long time, not something that expected a fight. They split at the perimeter and each walked their approach. The plan was not subtle. It was the plan you make when you have 4 people and 1 chance and no time for elaborate. Reeves's jamming device fragmented the drone coordination network, not destroyed the drones, just cut their communication with each other for 90 seconds, leaving each running its individual protocol, and individual protocols are predictable because they have no other choice. Faria and Kairos took east and west, low and fast, hitting the gaps in the field unit's perimeter coverage on the sides the drones had vacated. Reeves went north toward the jamming source, drawing attention. Alara went straight through the center. 3 Cathara operators converged on her center approach. They were fast and armored and capable, and they were protecting a platform that was 30 seconds away from sealing a process that would unthread 10,000 years of human civilization. She had a rifle, 2 cracked ribs, and 40,000 years of accumulated human obstinacy in her hand. She went through them. The first operator caught a rifle butt to the sensor housing at the joint. The weak point. The architectural trade-off. The same gap in every Cathara design. Because they had never needed to design for being hit by people who had been briefed on their weak points by a physicist with a data crystal. The second operator hit her in the shoulder and cracked the ribs she already had cracked, and she registered it and kept moving. The third operator reached for her and Faria, who had crossed the plaza at a pace that was not physically possible for someone with crossbow graze and a disruption wave impact and 63 years on a body, came from behind and put it down with the specific blow of a person who had also been briefed. Alara looked at Faria. Faria nodded, breathing hard, expression confirming what both of them already knew. That they were here, that they were going to make it. The 4 of them reached the platform at the same moment, from 4 directions, as if they had choreographed it, which they had in the way that people who have been moving together through impossible spaces for a day and a half choreograph things, not with explicit timing but with shared rhythm, the knowledge of each other's pace and angle, and the simple agreement that on this one moment they would all arrive together. They found the insertion points. They looked at each other across the 10-meter hexagon. Alara reached into her pocket. She held up the photograph. No one needed an explanation for why she was doing it. The photograph was the thing. The girl in the red chair, the ordinary kitchen, the Tuesday morning that had no significance except that someone had thought it was worth capturing. That was the whole argument. That was the thing the Cathara had spent 2,000 years observing and had not understood. Not the wars, not the collapses, not the recursive self-destruction. The Tuesday morning, the photograph taken of it, the small girl concentrating on something orange. Kairos touched his chest over his heart. Faria closed her hand around the clay bead. Reeves looked at the photo and then at Alara, and her expression was the expression of someone who understood exactly. Alara put the photograph away. On 3, she said. 1. Above the plaza, the Cathara ship pulsed amber. 2. All across the city, the temporal instability shivered, the layered decades, the wrong signs, the park that couldn't pick a year, a quiver running through the whole wounded timeline, as if it knew. 3. 4 cores, 4 insertion points. 1 instant. The Unraveler platform encountered an input state its designers had never modeled, had never needed to model, because it had never been necessary to model what happened when the thing you built to destroy the temporal continuity of a civilization was returned to itself all at once, fully loaded by the civilization it had targeted. It tried. It tried to run dispersal and reversal simultaneously, 2 opposing operations, and the collision of them produced, for 4 seconds, something that no one who felt it ever successfully described. A pressure, a weight, the feeling of something enormous breathing out. Then the lock. Alara was off the platform before the lock completed, running, arm around Kairos, who had stumbled on the edge, and Farvia was already past 50 meters because she had gone at 2.8 and not 3, and nobody was going to argue with that. And Reeves was 10 steps behind Alara, counting aloud under her breath. They cleared 50 meters at the 2-second mark. The platform locked 4 minutes. A sphere of white light, not quite pressure, something that was both and more than both, expanded from the platform and passed through everything. Buildings, streets, people, the layered wrong years, the temporal wounds the scatter had left open. the centuries that had been forced to coexist in spaces too small for them. It passed through all of it and left it right. Not healed, not undamaged, right. The specific rightness of a thing restored to its correct order. The continuous human line, from the valley and the fires and the man who threw an axe, forward through the river and the clay bead and the 60 years of documentation, and the ship in formation with the stars, the whole long unbroken story of a species that kept going. At 5 minutes and 12 seconds, the Cathara ship began to move. It did not attack. It did not speak. It moved northwest, up through the atmosphere, amber lights dimming as it climbed, the 3 smaller ships falling in formation behind it. The Unraveler platform folded itself down in the Cathara manner, tidily, completely, leaving no residue. The amber glow faded from the ruins of the plaza. By dawn, they were gone. Elara sat on the curb outside Marchetti's lab and watched the sky lighten. Kairaz was asleep on the steps behind her, the air core case still in his arms, asleep the way people sleep when they have nothing left to protect against. Faria was inside, letting Marchetti look at the crossbow wound and talking, from the sound of it, about Jurassic, the river tar, the correct calculation of the throw, the grandmothers saying about the ocean. Reeves was on the radio, giving the first coherent field report transmitted since the attack, her voice patient and precise, working through the static. The sky was the right color. That was the first thing Elara registered. The specific pink-orange of dawn over Sao Paulo without an amber filter, just the city and the light the city had always had, arriving from the same direction it had always arrived from, reliable and ordinary and enormous. She put her hand in her pocket and took out the photograph. The girl in the red chair was concentrating on something orange. Her mother had taken this photograph on a Tuesday, with no other significance, and kept it because she took photographs of unremarkable mornings. The kitchen in the background was a kitchen like every kitchen. She thought about the man in the valley. She thought about the touch of his finger on the sphere, the way the temporal static had responded to him. She thought about 40,000 years of people who had been that man, who had looked at the world and counted its rhythms and found the gaps, who had passed their knowledge forward in whatever medium they had, carved stone, oral tradition, written word, data chip, each generation handing the next the accumulated understanding of everything that had come before, the continuous line. She thought about Jurassic reading the drone's rotation with 30 seconds of observation. She thought about Adara making alien technology useful and writing down 2 years of documentation for someone she had just met because she wanted them to not have to start from zero. She thought about Sue in the 30th century saying we're human. It's the same thing, as if it were obvious, as if the whole 1,000-year conversation were simply an extended proof of something that had always been true. She thought about what the Cathara had said, a species assessed as incompatible with integration into the continuous, a species that fought among themselves and extracted resources and made the same mistakes recursively. All of that was accurate. She could not contest it. But the Cathara had sent drones to guard the cores, because they didn't value proximity to danger. And a man in a valley had done the math in 30 seconds and thrown on 3 without being asked, because he was already counting, because everyone in his world was always counting, because counting was survival. The Cathara had built systems to find what they already knew to look for, and a 19-year-old communications tech had spent an hour in the 30th century and found the gap. 2,000 years of observation, and they had never modeled attention. They had never modeled the Tuesday morning. Karaz stirred on the steps behind her. He blinked at the sky. "Is it over?" he asked. "Not permanently," she said, "but for now." He looked at the sky for a while, then he said, "I met Sue in the future." She said it like it was nothing, like 1,000 years of fighting, and we were still there, and that was just the situation, not the verdict. How do people get to that? How do you fight for 1,000 years and still sound like it hasn't broken you? Elara thought about this seriously. "I think you fight differently when you know you're not alone in the timeline," she said. "When you know that all the versions of you, past and future, are all on the same side." Kairaz was quiet for a moment. "Do you think they know? The 30th century ones, do they know about us, about this morning?" "The records are incomplete," she said. "That's what Adara told me about 2087. They knew about the scatter, but the records were incomplete. I think we were a gap in what they knew." She paused. "Not anymore." He considered this, then he lay back on the steps and looked at the brightening sky and said, "Tell me about the man in the valley." She leaned back beside him. The city was waking up around them. cautious and then less cautious. Voices and movement, someone's radio playing music in the distance, tinny and familiar and completely ordinary. In the street, a dog was walking purposefully towards somewhere, having decided where it needed to be. He threw an axe, she said. Perfect throw. He'd been watching the drone's rhythm for maybe 30 seconds, and he had it figured out, and he threw on 3 without me even saying 3. How'd he know you were counting to 3? She looked up at the sky. I think he was counting to 3 too, she said. Same moment, same count, same number. Different language, same count. Kiraz made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else and was both. 40,000 years. 40,000 years, she agreed. Reeves came outside and sat down beside her and held out a flask without comment. Alara took it without comment. The coffee inside was terrible, field emergency grade, the kind that tastes like a decision, and it was perfect. She drank it and held the flask warm in both hands and watched the sun clear the rooftops of Sao Paulo. Faria came out a few minutes later with fresh bandaging on her calf and sat on the other side. She was rolling the clay bead between her fingers, and she stopped rolling it and held it still in her palm for a moment, looking at it, and then she closed her hand and held it in a fist, and whatever she was thinking about she didn't say and none of them asked. A block away, the last temporal instability finished resolving. There was no sound to mark it, no crack, no light, just a quality in the air changing, a long tension releasing, the feeling of something that had been held under enormous pressure being allowed to rest. The wrong years folded back into the right year. The city breathed. Above them, the sky was clear. The amber was gone. The Kethara had run their terminal correction and found the species uncorrectable. In a valley 40,000 years ago, in a river bend in colonial South America, in a transit hub in 2087, in a formation of ships in the 30th century, uncorrectable. The thing that looked like a flaw from outside. The recursive self-destruction and the territorial conflict and the accumulated pattern of a species that could not seem to stop making the same mistakes. It was the surface of something else, something the Kethara had not modeled, could not model, because they had stopped doing the thing that would have let them understand it. They had stopped being surprised, and in the specific human capacity for surprise, for noticing the gap that no one had cataloged yet, for throwing on 3 without being asked because you had been counting the whole time. In that, and not in technology or force or anything that could be quantified and calculated, was the thing that had kept the line continuous, the thing that would keep it continuous. The coffee was terrible. Kiraz had gone back to sleep on the steps. The dog had arrived wherever it was going. Reeves was still on the radio, patient and precise, reconstructing the record. And somewhere above all of it, in the records of the Kethara continuous that 2,000 years of observation had built, a notation would be added, something in their clinical, careful language, something that translated, roughly, as reassessment required. They had missed something. They were going to need a very long time to figure out what it was. Alara finished her coffee. She put the flask down. She looked at the photograph one more time. The girl, the chair, the kitchen, the morning that had no significance. And she put it away in her breast pocket over her heart, where she had always kept it, where it was going to stay. She stood up. There was work to do.